Welcome, Rachel. Okay, great. Well, thank you. Happy to be here. I'd be remiss if I don't recognize my ALF buddy. Class 21, Doug and I did ALF. It seems like a lifetime ago. It was pre-COVID, but I'm so happy to be here. So really nothing to talk about. Retail, nothing's going on right now for the retail industry in California, so I'm done. No, I'm kidding. A lot of things going on with retail, and I'm so honored to be leading the Retailers Association. I actually assumed this role 2.5 years ago. Seems like 20 some days. Most of my tenure has been during the global pandemic, so it's been interesting. But it's a great opportunity, and not only do I have the privilege of representing the retail industry, which touches pretty much every aspect of business in the state of California, but I'm able to work with a lot of my colleagues just around the business climate within the state. And so that's been quite a ride, particularly over the last few months or a year or so as we've dealt with COVID. So I thought I would start and just really touch on kind of the three things that I would say keep me up at night when it comes to retail. One is, anyone want to guess? What's probably the top thing that keeps me up at night right now? I'm sorry? Supply chain. Yeah, supply chain is one big one. You will have things on your shelves, I promise. It may not be everything that you want, but we are working very hard to make sure that we work with the ports to get those goods out of those cargo ships, onto the trucks, to the warehouses. But it's been an interesting ride dealing with supply chain and the goods movement in California. Unfortunately, I would say this, is that we saw this coming. We knew prior to COVID that we were going to have some issues. We knew that we had a workforce issue with trucking. We knew that we had a population of truck drivers that were starting to transition into retirement. We weren't refilling those positions as quickly as we needed to. We also knew that we had some challenges when it came to the workforce at the ports. And we were having those conversations when I first took this position, and then COVID, and everything stopped. And so I think that a couple of things happened was, number one, we had this workforce issue going on that we knew about. But then number two, I know when COVID hit, I did a lot of Zoom calls with a lot of particularly small and independent retailers. My number one piece of advice was what? What did you think I told them all you needed to do when COVID hit? You need to go online. You need to shop. You needed to have an online presence. If there's one thing that we learned about COVID is that regardless of how big or small your business is, you have to have an online presence. And so, we did see, people are sitting at home. I mean, I was sitting at home, and what do you do when you're sitting at home? Oh my gosh, you know what, I could really use a new chair. I really need to do this. We had to buy desks for our kids because they were at home for school. So suddenly people really started getting used to sitting at home, shopping, and having it dropped off at your doorstep. And so we weren't quite ready for that yet. And particularly for the influx of retailers, and not just retail, but we saw it with grocery stores, we saw it with alcohol, we saw it with fast food, we saw it with a lot of industries. That put some strain on the supply chain, and we haven't been able to catch up yet. So that was a big issue. And then there were some regulations. I will be honest, California, how many of you all know, we are the most regulated state in the nation when it comes to business, right? And what's frustrating to me, particularly when you're dealing with the supply chain and the goods movement, is one of my colleagues calls it's a system of systems, right? For the supply chain. I think we're learning more and more how the supply chain impacts us every day as just everyday Californians and everyday consumers. But what happens is, no one is looking at, from a 30,000 foot level, how all of these laws and regulations are impacting the entire goods movement in the state of California. So let me give you an example. On May 7th, I know the date because I spent 8 hours on a Zoom call on a regulatory board down in Southern California who passed what they call the indirect source rule. Why does that matter to you up here or me up here in Northern California? Does some of you know? How many know about the indirect source rule? Anyone? So basically, what AQMD down in Southern California decided to do was we are going to tax warehouses for emissions that come out of the port, whether or not they're getting goods from the port coming to their warehouse. Because somehow they are responsible for the emissions and climate, and we need to focus on climate change. And we kept arguing to them saying, well, when you do this, and it's a tax that they couldn't justify, they couldn't tell us how the money was going to be spent, but when they passed that, we were very clear. We said, when you start doing that, particularly for me, who represents, I have a number of national retailers who have distribution centers and warehouses in California. They told me, we're looking at building more distribution centers and warehouses. Why? Because consumers are demanding doing more online shopping, so we need those distribution and centers and warehouses. But we can't build them in California. Because as business owners, what's the one thing that you really are looking for? Stability, right? You want to be able to plan. You want to be able to plan your budgets. So guess where they're building their warehouses and distribution centers? Nevada, Arizona. Because it is cheaper to get, if they can get it out of the port, it's cheaper to truck those goods across the state of California, use the distribution center and warehouse in Nevada, Arizona, and truck it back into California. But when we talk about the supply chain problem that we have right now, part of the problem with the supply chain and the port, and why we have so many cargo ships sitting out in the Port of LA and Long Beach, we don't have enough warehouse space that's available in Southern California. So my point is that we don't look at how these regulations are going to impact long term. And this is just, recently. I'll give you another example. The legislature passed a bill, 8701, which dealt with warehousing and warehouses. And we were adamantly opposed to the bill. Had a whole statewide coalition against it. I got the call from the governor's office saying that he was going to sign it. And 2 minutes later, she said, but Rachel, can we talk about how we can increase warehouse space in California? And I said, well, you could start by having a veto bill. But that's the challenge that we're facing right now, is that we don't have in California, we tout that we're the 5th largest economy in the world, right? The reason why we're also the 5th largest economy in the world is what? Because 40% of the goods nationally come through the Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA. If that is shut down, which it kind of is right now when you see all of the cargo ships sitting out in the port, what's that going to do? That's going to hurt us as Californians because we are going to lose that market share. I was at a lunch with the new president of Baja California, incredible woman, and they were lobbying me. We will build the port in Encinitas. We will have, what do your members want? We will divert, bring it here, whatever they want. We will make sure they have it, and that's what's going to start to happen. Because how many of you depend on the supply chain? Right? So have you been affected yet? Anyone been affected yet by the supply chain? How?
Our restaurant equipment is arriving about 4 or 5 weeks late. We ordered it 7 months ago.
Yep, and where is it, down in LA, Long Beach? Yeah. Anyone else? Who else is affected by the supply chain?
Inflation.
Oh, inflation. Oh, well, that's a whole other story. We'll get into that too. But yeah, who else? Yeah.
Yeah, we're freight brokers, so all of our customers are being affected, which in turn affects our business. That they're not being able to get their shipments, they're not able to get their freight off the port.
Yeah.
It's been insane.
And here's the challenge: is I don't know how to fix it, and unfortunately, I don't think anyone knows how to fix it. I appreciate, the president coming out and saying, now we're going to move Port of LA to 24/7. We'll see if that works. Port of Long Beach has been doing it already, and we haven't seen it have a huge impact. Why? Because the goods movement is just not dependent on the ports being open 24/7. And when you sit on these calls, which I do, and how many of you have been on these calls where you're just like tearing your hair out because everyone's pointing fingers at everyone else, and no one is focused on how do we solve it? Because now is not the time to be placing blame. I don't care. Now is the time to be saying, how are we going to solve it for the next, at least for 80 days for retail, right? Because we want to make sure that everything gets on the shelves. But this is going to be an ongoing problem. You know, my members are saying, some of the big national chains, 2023, before we're really going to be able to make some movement in this. And that's going to impact every one of us, and to your point, that's going to impact inflation. Why? Supply and demand, right? If you can't get the supplies, and the demand is there, you're going to have to increase your cost. And unfortunately, what we're not talking about specifically in California is all the extra costs that go onto it because California is such a regulated state for business. So one of my ideas, and I'm trying to figure out how to do this, is I always use, when I talk to the media, I use a hamburger approach, right? And you have this really great hamburger, maybe it's vegan, maybe it's, but, you know, and you add layer after layer after layer. And you know, for a while there it's okay and it tastes really good, but eventually it gets so big that you can't even eat it. And that's how we're getting in the state of California. Because it's right, and we're not talking, and one of my big pet peeves, and I've said this when I talk to legislators or I talk to the governor's office, is when do we start looking at regulations and really seeing are they being effective? And if they're not being effective, then let's get rid of them. But that doesn't work, we all know that, right? In government, it's very hard to take away once it's already been there. But I think until we really start to address that, the supply chain is a perfect example of eventually it's going to catch up to every one of us. Some of you are already feeling it. Some of you are feeling it, you know, in other ways, how it affects your other businesses. But eventually, all of us are going to be hit by the supply chain issue if we don't find a solution. And there's two parts to it. We're in a crisis, so let's figure out solutions to the crisis that we're in. And then we have to have broader conversations about how do we make the changes so that we don't get put in a situation in the future. And one is absolutely talking about how do we bring manufacturing back to the United States and how do we bring it back to California, right? And that's something that my colleague at the Manufacturers Association, he and I talk a lot because we have to, because we're dependent on manufacturing and retail. Right? So we need to bring that back. And I think those are conversations that we need to start having and that we will start having, particularly at the legislature. So that's supply chain. And we'll get back to that too, because here's the other thing that fits into supply chain, COVID. And I'm waiting for the big announcement of what exactly are in the OSHA guidelines coming out of the Biden administration when it comes to the vaccine mandate. How many of you have more than 100 employees? Couple. How many of you have more than 20 employees? Couple. So here's my prediction, if I could read the tea leaves. Or maybe this is my hope. My hope is that we know the vaccine mandate is going to come, right? We know he's going to do. The question is, on the testing portion, who pays for the test? Is it the employer or is it the employee? Because if it's the employer, that's going to be huge for a couple of reasons. Because the cost is humongous when you start talking about particularly, I mean, I've been talking to big retailers. Some of these big retailers can't afford to pay for the testing on a national scale like they're asking to do. So that's number one. Number two, how is this going to affect the workforce? Because here's the other dirty secret. When we talk about manufacturing, guess what happened? We were manufacturing tests in the United States. When the vaccine came out, right, everyone thought everyone was going to get the vaccine, testing was going to go away. These manufacturing centers shut down. So guess where some of these tests are sitting right now? Port of Long Beach and Port of LA. So there's going to be a testing shortage, right? So if you as a business owner have an option of either getting your employee vaccinated and they choose not to be vaccinated, which is their choice, and then your next option to keep them working is a weekly test, and they can't get access to a weekly test, then what happens, right? So that's part of it. And then I will say in California, what I think you'll see happening in January is a bill coming out, because I've talked with the author, to drop it down to a vaccine mandate in California for any business with 20 or more employees. And I think that will be fast-tracked through the legislature. And here's the question I always have when I talk to the legislatures about the vaccine. What problem are we really trying to solve? And how is this going to really help the economy? Because, you know, we have to get people back into the job market. We have to get people back working. We have to give them an incentive to get back working. And this isn't going to do it. But yet, I still think that's going to come down the pipeline. We're also watching paid sick leave. At the end of the legislative session, there was a push to try to extend the paid sick leave that they had done through the emergency, under the emergency of COVID. And they were trying to attach the sweetener to businesses that if you went ahead and just on your own mandated the vaccine, you would have the liability protection that a lot of businesses wanted. I think I'm losing my thing. Wanted. But on the flip side, then they were going to increase back to 2 weeks of paid sick leave. We were pushing back on that. We were able to stop it because in what I think you'll also see coming forward on the vaccine mandate is 72-hour paid sick leave for any employee who gets vaccinated in case there is a reaction to the vaccine. But the problem that I'm asking when I talk with legislators, when I talk to local electeds, how many of you know what's going on down in the city of LA, right about the city of LA and their mandate, their ordinance? So they basically now you have to show proof of vaccine to go in almost any area. This is what I deal with on a daily basis. They excluded retailers. We were able to get them to exclude retailers, but they included shopping malls, right? So I'm like, okay, great. So they're like, well, retailers don't have to verify vaccine status, but the mall operators have to verify vaccine status. So think about Roseville Mall right here, right? How many entrances are there into the Roseville Mall, right? So the mall operator, if they were in LA, city of LA, just the city, not the count, just the city, would have to have people at every single entrance verifying vaccine. I said, what problem are you trying to solve? What's the problem? Is it the food court? Because if it's the food court, then we'll work with the mall operators to make it to-go only and we'll shut down the food court. Is it you don't want people hanging out, sitting on the chairs in the mall? Great, we'll shut that down. We'll turn. No, we just want people to be inconvenienced so that they don't feel. And I said, but how again does that solve the problem of getting people vaccinated? But here's the kicker on something like Los Angeles, and as you see some of these local governments, and we're pretty fortunate up here because we haven't had to deal with a lot of these ordinances, is they're tying these ordinances on the vaccine to the emergency order, to the emergency orders that's tied to the governor. So until the governor says he's going to rescind the emergency proclamation on COVID, all of these ordinances will stay in place. And I have no idea when that's going to happen because we've asked, what data points are you using? What's your exit strategy? Right? We got into COVID. How are we going to get out of COVID? And we don't know yet. Because that's another challenge for business. Because I look at whether it's retail or whatever, you're always under this cloud, right? What's going to happen next? What ordinance is going to happen next? Not so much up here, but we see it a lot in the Bay Area, and we see it a lot in Los Angeles. What's the next thing they're going to do? And I think that as a business, you can't operate that way. You need to have that certainty that you know you can continue to operate. So we continue, that's something that, I always joke with my board when we have board meetings, I wish I could take COVID off, like not have it as an agenda item. I live for the day when we no longer have to talk about COVID, but I think we're going to continue to have to talk about it for a long while until we can get clarity from particularly the governor's office and then from local governments on when some of these orders are going to be expiring. And some are good orders, right? Some of the things that Newsom did were good. For restaurants, the outdoor dining is here to stay, alcohol to go alcohol is here to stay. There's some good things that have been codified in state legislation, which is what we really need to continue to do, is take the good things, codify that into state legislation, but get rid of the ability. We're still living under executive orders and emergency orders from the Brown administration related to fires and earthquakes and those types of things. So we really need to encourage him to tell us as Californians what's the exit strategy for us to move forward and get past COVID. And then the third thing that kind of keeps me up at night, how many of you saw any news out of San Francisco related to retail? Walgreens, 5 Walgreens closed. Why? Why did they close? Retail theft. I've become an expert on retail theft. That's a big issue, huge issue in California. In fact, we're looking at, as an association, really starting to explore the correlation between homelessness and retail theft. Because what we're seeing more and more is that the homeless population, a couple of things. Number one, they're preyed upon by organized crime. So organized crime will come in, these criminals, and they will go up to someone who's homeless or has an addiction problem, hand them a list, and say, for $100, go in and get these items. And they'll go in, they do the shoplifting, they turn it over to the booster hands them $100. And they know that, particularly in an area like San Francisco, the homeless person or the person with the addiction problem isn't going to get arrested, right? So it's a major issue. The amount of money that is lost, the tragedy is the victims, which there are victims, and the victims are not the stores. The victims are the customers that are in the store when this happens, and the employees that work there. So in the case of Walgreens, I'll be honest with you, I was a little kind of proud of Walgreens for once, that they said, this is because of retail theft. Because in San Francisco, we've been dealing with this issue. You all remember, I call him our bicycle bandit. Do you remember the video? How many of you saw the video of the guy who went into Walgreens and then a week later, Target announced that they were closing at 6 o'clock because of retail theft. And then 3 days later, how many of you saw the Neiman Marcus video, right? So I was doing media interviews all the time. And I met with the district attorney, the mayor, and the police chief, and I said, if you don't clean up your mess, more stores are going to close. And one of them, I won't tell you who, said, well, I think the answer is retailers just need to lock up all their merchandise. So how many of you want to go into your local Walgreens or CVS and everything is locked up? Because even here, the Sacramento region, just, FYI, out of the 10 top cities for retail theft in the nation, Los Angeles is number 1, San Francisco, Oakland's number 2, Sacramento region is number 8. We're number 8 in this region. So it's a problem, mostly down in, I think, more Sacramento, city of Sacramento. And part of it is because you've got these cities that no one's going downtown anymore, right? I have an office downtown Sacramento. I don't go down there that often. It's kind of depressing. No one's there. It's not the vibrant kind of downtown that it was prior to COVID. So people are staying home, they're working from home, and that allows some of these crimes to continue to happen. But the flip side of the coin is when we passed Prop 47 in 2014, it's not so much about the moving the number from 450 for a felony to 950, it's that Prop 47 took away the ability of a judge to offer, or a district attorney, you can go to jail, or you can go to a diversion program. So when we talk about the increase in homelessness and people with mental health issues and drug addiction, and local governments talk a lot about it on their streets, it's a big issue. Part of the problem is that stick that we used to have to get these people that needed that compassionate care is gone. So now what happens? What they do is they steal up to, no joke, $949.50. In some cases, some of these guys keep their receipts. So they'll go into cars in San Francisco. You hear about the break-ins in cars. They will only steal bags if the receipts are in there. Why? Because they can show law enforcement, see, I'm not over 950. Because if they're not over 950, they just get a ticket. That's it, it's a misdemeanor. And so when we don't have consequences for our behavior, when it comes to retail theft in particular, that is funneling, that's fueling a lot of these other social problems that we're seeing, particularly in some of our larger cities and across California. So we're trying to figure out how we can marry that issue, because what more and more we're seeing is folks going in and using a local Safeway, Walgreens, Rite Aid as their pantry. And then they walk out. The other part of this equation, though, is online marketplaces, right? And that's the next step that the California Retailers Association is looking at next year, is where these items are being sold. And I hate to tell you, but if you go onto a website and it's a really good deal on an item that you really want, and you know it costs a lot more in the store, and it's really cheap online, it's probably stolen. And so we're really trying to put some guardrails around the online marketplace, because this is a growing problem. And it goes back to your point, sir, about inflation and cost of goods. We all end up paying for it, right? We all end up paying for it because these stores have to. In San Francisco, though, as an example, part of the reason Walgreens closed, it costs 46% more to do business in San Francisco than in any other city in the nation. Because you have to pay for off-duty police officers to come in to sit in your stores to try to protect it from retail theft, and it's still not making a dent in what's going on. So those are kind of my top three. I'm getting this on. Any questions about what's going on right now? Supply chain, COVID, or retail theft, or any other issue related to kind of retail or the business climate in Sacramento? Open any questions if you have any.
Question.
Yeah.
So if homeless is part of the problem,
Mm-hmm.
do you believe that we should put money towards large companies that want to do medical and homeless, I don't know what you want to call them, but
Yeah.
So
I think those are great. If you have the stick to kind of, some of these people, we're going to have to, at some point, there's going to have to be consequences that will encourage them to take advantage of those programs. As an example, the city of Sacramento just opened a couple of brand new homeless shelters, state-of-the-art homeless shelters. They're only filled at 20%. Those are the people that want to be there because they want to get out of that lifestyle. They appreciate the opportunity to get a leg up. But some of the folks we're dealing with, it's their lifestyle. And it's I'm not trying to be, we want to help them, right? They have an addiction problem, we want to help them. But unfortunately, because we took that away, there's no incentive for them to take advantage of some of these programs. I mean, the governor invested billions of dollars in Project Home Key, or Project Room Key. They're not full. Why? Because he did all of that investment, but over here we're not taking care of, and those are hard decisions to make. But I think that if we're really going to try to wrap our minds and our arms around the homelessness population, the problem that's across the state, we really need to look at the compassionate piece of this, which is we're not throwing them in jail. We're trying to make sure that they get the support and the resources that we've already invested in order to make those changes. Any other questions? Yeah.
What does retail look like for you in 5 years?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Actually, I will say this. A lot of them are investing in brick and mortar stores. I think those are coming back. They're smaller, so some of the big box stores, as an example, are looking at smaller footprints. I think the other thing you're seeing is a lot of retailers getting into different industries. Healthcare is a big one. Tech is another big one. I think you're seeing retailers becoming their own little distribution centers. So what you'll see is companies being able to do deliveries right out of your local store. I think you're going to see that a lot more. And that's owned by the retailer, not by a third party, because of some of the independent contracting laws in California. So I think you're going to see that. I think what'll be interesting to your question is, where do malls go, right? And I think that's the difference. I think people want to have more control of their environment. So I think that's where I see it in the next, 3 to 5 years. But when I took this job, and I'll close with this, people were like, you go to retail, retail's dead, right? It's dying. I'm like, no, it's not. I think actually COVID is bringing back a new life to the industry. I think you're going to see some great changes. And for me in particular, I have a soft spot particularly for our independent retailers and our small businesses, because they're the ones that we really have to help right now. Last year we were able to keep retail open at 20% capacity over the holiday season. I pushed for more for our smaller retailers, but I really believe in the industry. I believe in California, and I think we could have a bright future. And I'm just there, just trying to do my part to make sure that we can make that happen. So thanks for having me. I appreciate your time.